start with your full name, please?
Hershel Woodrow Williams. And my first name is spelled Hershel. And Woodrow, self-explanatory, and Williams, Williams.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in a place called Quiet Dell, Q-U-I-E-T, 2 words, Dell, D-E-L-L, in Marion County, West Virginia, near Fairmont, West Virginia. But we were way out in the country, so it was just a community.
And what is your birth date, sir?
October 2, 1923.
So how old are you today?
I am 95. I was 95 October the 2nd, last year.
And which branch of the military did you serve with?
I served in the United States Marine Corps.
And which unit within the Marines did you serve with?
Say again.
Which unit in the Marines?
I was with the 1st Battalion, 21st Regiment, 3rd Marine Division.
And what years did you serve from and until?
I went in May 1943 and got out in November 1945. Then I got involved in the reserve program and served in it about 18 years, give or take a few days, and eventually ended up with credit for 20 and retired from the Marine Corps as a Chief Warrant Officer 4.
So can you tell me about your childhood growing up in West Virginia and what that was like for you?
Yeah. When I was about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, my dad decided that he wanted to start a dairy. So he started the dairy farm of milk cows and arranged to have a delivery kind of service. We delivered milk and produce during the summer months particularly, but eggs and that sort of thing that people would want, to people in Fairmont, which was 7 miles away. And of course we did that every morning, 7 days a week. There were no grocery stores on the corners back in those days, so about the only way the folks could get dairy products was to have it delivered to the home. So he established a route, and I don't remember how the customers came along. Apparently one would let the other one know that it's possible. So finally we got a good size route, group of houses on different streets in the community. So every morning during the summer months, we kids, of course I wasn't old enough in the beginning, but eventually I was. I had 3 brothers that already were involved, of course. They were old enough, they were older than me. But every morning we would take the milk and butter and whatever to town and deliver in milk bottles the milk to the houses that had indicated they wanted that type of a service. And we'd pick up the empty bottles that we'd left the day before. So we kids, all we had was a Model T Ford to start with. And then when Model A Fords came out, my dad was able to get one of those, so it was a little better car. And we kids would stand on the running board of the pickup truck, one on each side, and when we came to the house, he would tell us what to take: quart of milk, pint of cream, dozen eggs, whatever it was that goes to that house. And that's how we made our living. And as I said, we did it 7 days a week.
Quite different from how we get our groceries now.
Isn't it, though? Yes. Yeah.
And you said about 5 years old?
I was 5 years old when he started the farm, and then when I was somewhere between 7 and 8, each boy, each boy, I had a sister, older sister, but she was mom's helper. She wasn't out in the farm like we were, milking cows, hoeing corn, and putting up hay and all that stuff. But we boys would have to take the turn as you came old enough. It was your turn to get the cows in the barn, get them fed, prepared to be milked. And so as I got to be about 6 or 7 years old, then that became my job, because I was the last child, and all the rest of them had been through it, so now I get the job, And you had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go get the cows, get them in their proper place in the barn, and make sure that they had feed. And one of the things that we had to do was to wash down the milk sack on the cow and the udders to make sure that it was clean. And then the others would come along, and everybody had so many cows that they were assigned to milk. Well, I started out with one, of course, as just a little boy, small hands. But as you got older and got better, then you'd get another one, So eventually everybody was milking 4 or 5 cows, and we were milking about 35 cows every morning and every evening.
So that taught you responsibility and hard work at a very young age.
Absolutely.
And what would happen if you complained about having to get up and do this work?
You didn't complain. It was just one of those things when you're, as we grew up, when Dad told you something, you just did it because he had already made it very clear, I only want to tell you one time. I don't want to have to tell you the second time, one time. And so that's how we were raised. So we didn't question or didn't say, I don't want to do that. You didn't dare say that. You just did whatever you were told to do. And everybody had that same culture and upbringing, so you didn't even question it.
Yeah, I bet those winter mornings were pretty cold.
They were, and back in my day, we really had severe winters. We really did. Lots of snow. Usually we lived up, this is northern West Virginia, pretty close to Pennsylvania. We had snow that would usually start in October or November, and we'd just almost keep it constantly until March or April. Then spring would come and, of course, change the weather. But they were severe winters back in those days.
So growing up during the Great Depression, did you guys feel the effects of that? Or did you notice?
We didn't. Everybody was in the same boat, so we couldn't make any measurement. You didn't have anything to measure by. Your neighbor wasn't any better off than you were, so everybody was struggling to exist and make a living. So you couldn't compare apples to apples.
I guess it would be easier to compare the times then to what
yeah, absolutely.
So in that sense, can you sort of...
Oh, absolutely. We seldom ever went to town. Now, and during the summer months, we never went to town because every day was a work day, including Sunday. We raised all of our own hay, all of our own corn, our wheat, our buckwheat, potatoes and gardens. So there was always work to be done, and it was one of those things you just worked from daylight to dark. And it was just part of life. That was life, Then during the winter months, after we got all the crops in, then we would get to go to town on a Saturday. Saturday was the big day. You couldn't hardly walk on the streets on Saturday because everybody did that. Very seldom did they go during the week because everybody's working. But on Saturday, they'd take that and everybody go to town. So they'd give us we didn't have any money, no allowances or anything of that nature. But on those winter days or in the fall of the year, they'd usually give us 10 cents. And as I said, we were 7 miles out of town. Now, they didn't take us to town. We could go to town, but we had to get ourselves there. You either walked or you'd walk on the road and somebody come along and pick you up and give you a ride. If they saw you on the road walking, it was just customary that the car would stop and you'd get in, and whether you knew the people or not didn't make a bit of difference. They'd take you as far as they were going or clear into town if they were going to town. And that 10 cents would get you in the movie for a nickel, and it would get you a hot dog or an ice cream cone for a nickel. So that was our Saturday treat, to see a movie and get one or the other. You know, hot dog, well, usually we bought ice cream. You can get a hot dog at home, you know, but you couldn't get ice cream at home. So we usually would spend that nickel for an ice cream cone.
So aside from what you had just mentioned, what would you guys do for fun, for recreation?
We made our own recreation, absolutely. We developed things, played a lot of marbles, you know. We had kind of championship marble games, and some guys were very good at it. Tires, take a tire off of a car that had blew out or worn out, whichever, and we would hand roll that thing mile after mile. Just that it was a little bit competitive with each other, who could outrun each other, and we'd always try to find a bigger tire because it would go faster. Little tires, you have to do a lot of paddling, you know, but if you had a big tire, you could paddle it one time and it'd go 2 or 3 feet and hit it again and it'd go, you know. So that was competitive.
Did you ever find any big enough to get inside of it?
No. Tires were very narrow back in those days. And the other thing we did was we'd take iron hoops, usually off of a barrel, metal hoop off of a barrel, and then we'd make ourselves a little paddle with a stick and a piece of wood nailed to it, and we'd roll that hoop. And that was a competitive kind of a thing. You know, who could go the fastest, not lose his hoop. You know? So we made our own entertainment. There. I have no idea who that is either. I'm going to take that off.
So there was no video games back in...
No, and we never, at home, we never had a radio. Now, some of the families were where they had a real steady job, like we had some plants in town 7 miles away. Some of the people in the community, the men, would work at those plants, and those individuals had a steady income. So most of those families, and I had 2 uncles that worked at Owens, Illinois Glass Company. Well, both of those uncles had radios. They could afford a radio. We never did have a radio, and I guess we never could afford a radio. So if we wanted to hear something, which usually I did anyway, and well, my brothers did too, we'd go to our uncles to hear the radio, you know. And back in those days, they had serials on the radio, stories, continuous stories. And I remember some of those exceedingly well, Rin Tin Tin and Hopalong Cassidy and just all kinds of stories. And they were half hour, and right at the end, they'd always have something that the dog is about to get killed, or he's about to go over a cliff, or something. So you had to come back next week to see if they survived.
The cliffhanger.
Cliffhangers, that's exactly right. And they played that to the hilt, you know, because they'd get you back next time.
You got to find out what happens.
Yeah, but that was about the only entertainment that we really had, you know.
Now, were you and your brothers close?
Me and one brother, my brother next to me, we were real close. The others were considerably older, so we didn't have a whole lot in common, I guess. You know, they had their own things that they did, and we had our own things that we did. So, but families, we always, evening meal, if you were home, you had to everybody eat together. None of this piecemeal stuff, you know. When dinner's ready, everybody goes to the table. Everybody eats at the same time. And family gatherings were very common because otherwise you're working and one guy's doing one thing on the farm and the other's doing something else. So during the day, you don't never have an opportunity to associate much with each other. And by night, when you're finished, well, you're done. You're ready to go to bed because you're going to get up early the next morning and do it again, you know. So it was a tough life, but it was a good life.
Do you think that having that type of upbringing helped prepare you for what was to come?
No question. No question. When I went into the Marine Corps and into boot camp, I had no problem whatsoever because I had been trained by my dad and my older brothers that when you're told to do something, you do it, and you do it to the very best that you can do it. So when that drill instructor said, you know, get down there and give me 25 push-ups, I didn't question whether I should do or not. I was just going to do it because that's the way I was raised, see. So I had no difficulty whatsoever in the Marine Corps in following orders and fitting into what they were doing. Because when they gave an order, that was it. Don't question.
Now, was your father a military man?
No, he was too young for World War I, and he was too old for World War II. But he died relatively young age, 44, of a heart attack. So he died when I was 11.
That must have been tough on you.
Well, it was, but you know, I was closer to Mom than I was to Dad because Dad was working all the time. You just never had any time to sit down and talk or build a relationship, really. But with Mom, you did because Mom's in the house, you know. So Mom was more of the controller so far as what we did than Dad was. Now, if Dad left an order, you did it, you know. But so far as day-to-day activities were concerned, once he said, today we're going to hoe corn, then that's it, you know. We hoe corn.
And did any of your brothers serve in World
Had two brothers. Both of those were brother next to me and then the one next to him were drafted in 1942, shortly after the war started. Being drafted, naturally they went to the Army because the Marine Corps wasn't drafting and Navy wasn't drafting. And the individuals going into the Army, if they could qualify, they could go to the Army Air Corps, but they were also draftees. They'd first been drafted as an Army person, then they could go to the Army Air Corps. But the other branches didn't have any draft service, so the two brothers who were drafted in 42, being in the Army, they were, for a period of time, stationed in the States. One was in Maryland, the other was in Ohio. So occasionally they would get home on a weekend, but they'd hitchhike. Hitchhike home, hitchhike back, because there was no bus service, there's no train service out to our area, you know, so they had to hitchhike. And they wore their Army uniforms generally when they come home, and they were those old brown woolen Army uniforms. And right from the beginning, I said, that's the ugliest thing in town. So I didn't want to wear that thing. And I am convinced in my own mind what drew me to the Marine Corps, knowing nothing about Army or Marine Corps, having no background whatsoever, it was the Marine Corps dress blues that attracted me because they were so much better looking than the Army uniform.
It's a pretty sharp uniform.
Yeah. And in my day, people on active duty got one 30-day furlough, they called it, a year. And they never got home other than that, unless it was an emergency. But they could go to town wherever they were based, of course, weekend pass. But they couldn't come home. Most of them weren't close enough that you could hitchhike home and get back in time, because you had to be there, like 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday, But we had 2 individuals in our community, even before the war, had gone into the Marine Corps apparently to make a living, and the only enlistment they had at that time was 6 years. When you signed up for 6 years. So they were required, when they came home, to wear their Marine Corps dress blue uniform. Because I've always thought the Marine Corps was using it kind of an advertising thing.
Seems like it worked.
Yeah, it did. It sure sucked me in. So that's why I wanted to go in the Marine Corps.
Smart. So did you finish high school? Did you graduate?
Nope. I spent a year, my first year, I went, keeping in mind that we're still 7 miles out of town. There's no bus service. There's no way of getting to school. And the folks only had one vehicle, and that was that pickup truck that worked every day. And Dad said, this is a farm work truck, not something you get in and ride around in, So I could ride the milk truck to town because they would usually get to town by 7 o'clock, But how am I going to get home when high school's out? The truck isn't there. The truck is back home. So I'd either walk that 7 miles, and I did that a number of times, or I would start walking and somebody would pick me up and I would catch a ride or two or three rides to get back home, And that wasn't anything unusual. Everybody had that situation. So I went the first year, and it was very difficult to get home, particularly during bad weather, winter months. So I started the second year, and then I dropped out. I just couldn't do it, I guess. Dad was already deceased, so I just couldn't do it. So I dropped out. So
after your father had passed away, did you and your brothers take over the responsibilities of the farm, or did
my older brother did, or next to the oldest brother did. The older brother was working at Owens, Illinois Glass Company, and they were doing war-type work during the World War II, so he was exempt because he was in war work. But the next brother, who was one of those who was drafted, he took over the operation of the farm. But for the most part, it was run by Mom. Now, she didn't do the day-to-day supervision in the fields and all that, but she's the one that kept the record, knew what we were doing, and whatever income we had, she kept track of that, So she really ran the farm, and my brother June was just kind of a foreman, if you would.
Sure. Yeah. Now, December 7th, 1941.
Yeah.
You remember where you were?
Yes, I do, very well. During the 39-40 period, the government established what was known as a Civilian Conservation Corps. We called it the 3 Cs. And my brother Gerald, who was next to me, next oldest, he did not particularly like farming. So when he learned about the Civilian Conservation Corps, he joined, much to my mother's disagreement, but he joined. And you could do that after you were 16 years old. You really did not need parent consent. So he joined and went to the Civilian Conservation Corps, and fortunately he got within about 60 miles of our home. So every once in a while on a weekend he would hitchhike home on Friday, then hitchhike back on Sunday, and he had money. They were paying, starting out, they were paying $21 a month. Well, we'd never had $21 a month in our lives, you know. So when he would come home, he would have some bills, money. And when I reached my 16th birthday, I thought, well, I'm going to do the same thing, you know. So here again, much to my mother's disagreement, I joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, thinking I would go to the very same base he was. I didn't know we had lots of them. I thought we only had one, and that's where he was. But when I joined, after I signed the papers, I'm going to a different place. I'm going to a different camp. And I think we had something like 29 of them in West Virginia. So we had a bunch of them. But they sent me to another city, which was also a place where we had people from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Tennessee, and every place else. And there were about something like 265 of us or something like that. And we worked in West Virginia for a period of time. Then all of a sudden, they said, okay, pack up, we're shipping out. They put us all on a train and sent us to Whitehall, Montana, which is a long ways from home. I didn't think I'd ever get back home again. I thought, there ain't no way. But they had established a camp at Whitehall, and their job, or our job after we got there, when we were the first people in the camp. But they had barracks for us to live in, just bunks, one right after another, 2 stories, barracks, and chow hall, and an office, and a maintenance building, vehicles and that sort of thing. So our job there was to cut pine posts out of the Rocky Mountains. And they'd take us in a truck to the mountains. That's where we worked. And we worked unless it was more than 20 below zero. If it was 20 or above, we still went to work. If it was below 20, then we got off a day. But snow didn't make any difference. Whether it was 5 foot deep or 10 feet deep, we still went to work, you know. And the civilian specialists, like foresters in our case, they were the supervisor once we went off base. And they were professional people. They knew timber and what to cut and what not to cut and how to cut and all that sort of thing. So we were cutting these posts to build fence around government property. And we would cut the posts, then we'd have to peel all the bark off of them, creosote them, put them in boiling creosote because they were pine, and the creosote would condition them so they would last years longer. And then we would take them out to the field and build a fence with them. That's what we were doing on the 7th of December, 1941. And the morning of the 8th, after the bombing, they called all of us out into a rough formation. It's a little bit military, but we weren't standing at attention or any of that stuff. We were just lined up in rows, if you would. And they told us at that time that America was going to war. And they gave everybody a choice that if you were over 18 years old, and I was still 17, But if you were over 18, you could go straight into the Army because the Army was running the base. We had a first sergeant, we had a mess sergeant, we had a commanding officer, we had clerks from the Army who did all the office work. So it was run by the Army. And that's why they said you could go straight from the Civilian Conservation Corps to the Army if you were over 18. If you were under 18, then you couldn't do it unless your parents would agree to it. And I didn't want to go in the Army. I'm still going back to that, those brothers coming home in that ugly uniform. I don't want to go in that outfit. You know, they still had the same ugly uniform. So I requested that I be released and come home for the purpose of joining. And they put me on a train and sent me home. I'm still not 18, and I wanted to go. I knew nothing about war. My only concept, I think, was we need to protect our country and our freedom, and I want to be a part of that, thinking that all of us would just stay here in the United States to guard our country so nobody could come take it away from us, because we had been told that's what they wanted to do. They want to take over our country, and I felt that I'm going to be a part of defending against that. But being 17, my mom had to sign my paper to go to war at that time, and she wouldn't do it. She said, I'm not going to sign the paper to go to war. So I had to wait till I was 18. And when I was 18, in October, in November, I went into the Marine Corps, recruiters in town, to go to the Marine Corps. I still wanted to be a part of this. And I filled out my paper to give to the recruiter. You know, you had to designate who is to get your $10,000 insurance in case you didn't make it back, and who's your next of kin, and you know, all that stuff. And he didn't even look at my paper, he just looked at me when I walked up, and it was chaotic. There were lots of people there. All branches of service were represented there. Army was over here, and the Marines over there, and the Navy over here, you know. So he didn't even look at my paper, he just looked at me and said, I can't take you. And I said, why? And he said, you're too short. I didn't question that. I didn't say, well, can't we do something about that? Or, you know, what's the requirement? Nothing like that. When he said, I can't take you, you're too short, that was it. I had no reason to question it.
You did what you were told.
That's right. He's the authority. See? So I went back home. I went back to the farm. And then in the following year, early 1943, the Marine Corps, realizing that they're going to have an awful lot more people because Guadalcanal had already happened, and they had a lot of casualties there. Pleiku, they had a lot of casualties there, so they knew they were going to have some more people. So they took the height requirement of 5'8" or better off. You didn't have to be that tall. So this recruiter, I am convinced in my own mind that all of those that he had to turn down because they were too short, he held on to that piece of paper. Because I think he knew this is going to have to change. We're going to have more individuals. We had a lot of Italian boys in our community because they had come there, the Italian folk had come there to work in coal mines, because it's easier for a short guy to work in a coal mine than it is a tall guy, you know. So a lot of them were coal miners, and most of them were short people like me, you know. So he had turned down probably an awful lot of people, and he actually came to look me up to see if I still wanted to go in the Marine Corps after he got word, you know, I can take short people now.
What did you measure in at?
5'6".
Okay.
I was 2 inches short.
2 inches short.
2 inches short. So then I could go, and of course in May of '43, well, I actually enlisted in February. But we had a waiting period. They were getting so many people that the Marine Corps didn't have drill instructors or housing or that sort of thing to take care of us. So they had a waiting period, and they were only taking so many from each state.
So they were backlogged with recruits. And
Yeah.
Trying to get them trained and
Yeah.
processed.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't the Marines for you, you didn't want to go anywhere.
No, I wasn't going to go unless I would have been drafted, of course. Sure. You know, when I got old enough, I would have been drafted.
So did your perception of what going to war, defending our country, from your initial perception, did that change? Before you actually joined the Marines? No,
it didn't change before I joined, but it did change during boot camp because our drill instructors, we had 3 drill instructors, and 2 of those already had been individuals who had been in combat overseas, and they brought them back to train those who are going to have to go. And that's when I actually learned that we're not going to fight this war in America. We're going to fight it someplace else. Had no idea where, and if they named names, didn't mean a thing in the world to me. I mean, if you'd have said to me Guadalcanal in 1943, it wouldn't have meant a thing, because I never heard tell of it, you know. That's like saying 10 years ago to me, gigabyte. Yeah, sure, I know what that is. Get out of here. So, but I did learn in boot camp that once we got trained, we were going overseas. You know, didn't know where, but we're gone. So.
Now I understand before you went into the Marines, before you joined the Marines, you were, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were driving cabs.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yes.
And occasionally you'd have to deliver telegrams.
That's true. Our farm at that period of time, that point of time, several things entered into it, but my 2 brothers being in the Army, and the other one working at Owens, my mom was desperate for people, and she just couldn't find people to work, so she began cutting the farm down, getting rid of the cows and that sort of thing, because she just couldn't get any help to take care of it. So when I went back to the farm, there was just no income coming in. And I had a boyhood friend that he and I'd gone to school together, who was the dispatcher for a cab bus company. And I went to see Vic, and I said, I need something to do. I need to earn some money. I don't have any money. You know, I'll wash buses or cabs or sweep the floor or whatever, anything. He said, well, we need cab drivers, because he said, these guys are resigning so fast to go to the war, we can't keep cab drivers. And he said, he knew I could drive, of course. So he said, you got to be 21 to drive cab. And he says, I know you're not 21. Of course, as I said, we went to school together, so he knew how old I was. But he said, give me a few days, and I'll see if I can't get you a driver's license. So a few days later, I was living with a family there in town at that particular time. He came to see me, and he said, I got your driver's license. Showed I was 21 years old. I have no idea where he got it. I didn't ask him. Yeah. But that authorized me then I could drive a taxi cab. So I began driving taxi from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning, 12-hour shifts. You know. And the War Department back at that time, the only way they had of notifying families when somebody was killed was by telegram. They had nobody in the community that they could, you know, send to or have an Army person there. Lots of communities didn't have anything. And so they would release a telegram late in the afternoon to the Western Union office. And this may be as strange to you as gigabyte was to me, a ticker tape. You know what ticker tape is? You do? Oh, okay. This thing would come in on ticker tape, real little narrow piece of paper, you know? And they would take that off of the machine, paste it to a telegram, then the regular Western Union telegram. But the War Department had furnished them with envelopes that had the War Department return address on it. And they were a different color. They were kind of a grayish color. They'd put that telegram in that envelope, would indicate that it was coming from the War Department. Then they would call the cab dispatcher. Say, I've got a telegram to be delivered to so-and-so. And I'm the cab driver, so they would, if it was in my area, my territory, then they would call me and say, you've got a telegram to be delivered. They didn't know what was in that telegram, you know. And I didn't either. But the folk, we'd had enough of those in 1943, you know, we'd had enough of those that word in the community, they already knew what that envelope contained the minute they saw it. It's not good, you know. But I didn't know that. So I delivered some of those, and it was rather emotional to have a mother come to the door and have to hand her this envelope that she knows is telling her, your son's not coming home. So there were all kinds of reactions, you know. As a 19-year-old, I really didn't know how to handle that. In my day, we would never hug a lady other than mom. Even sisters, we didn't hug sisters. But what does a 19-year-old do at that point? You know, what's he say? I didn't know what to say or what to do. So I usually just go back and get in the cab and go, because, you know,
seems
bad.
Like a very informal way to notify someone
Absolutely.
that their family member is.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming eventually you sort of realized, you put two and two together, that these envelopes carry
Absolutely.
a certain message.
Yeah. Yep. That envelope was the signal, if you will, that somebody had lost a life. Yeah. So that had an impact.
And did that experience lead to what you're doing today?
Partially, yes, it did. Then I had another school friend that lived about a quarter of a mile past me. I was between him and the school, so he had to walk by my house every day. We walked back and forth to school every day. There was no such thing as there was no buses. And the families, Mr. Brown worked at a plant in town, and they only had one car, so he's worked with the car. And as my dad said, this vehicle is only for farm work. We don't get in it and ride around, you know. So we walked back and forth to school. He was 1 year ahead of me. But every day, for every school day, we walked back and forth. And we became very close friends. And after Dad died, Mr. Brown kind of became a surrogate father. Brothers are not particularly good for advice, I don't think. So if I had a problem or had a question, I'd usually go to Mr. Brown, because I know he's going to give me a sensible answer, you know, or instead of, go figure it out for yourself, you know. But when while I was overseas, Leonard, and I didn't know this, of course, had no way of knowing it, he was a nose gunner on a 24. And a ground ACAC hit the nose of the 24 and severely wounded him. They finally did land, but he died 4 days later. and he was buried in the Philippines. Well, I had none of that information. I didn't know that. I did know Leonard was in the Army. I knew that because I wanted to go in the Marine Corps with me, and he wouldn't do that. He wanted to be in Army Air Corps, you know. So when I got home is when I learned that Leonard is not coming home. Yeah. So Mr. and Mrs. Brown, when I got home in November 1945, although he was killed in 44, they had no details whatsoever about him, of how it happened. They did know that he had died because they got the telegram telling them that he had died. And they did know that he was buried in the Philippines. That's about it. They didn't know what happened or how it happened. Nothing, you know. And back in those days, we weren't bringing our loved ones back home. We were burying them wherever we were, you know. So when I found that out, I can vividly remember he had a brother, Brownie, who was also in the Army. Another brother, Lee, who had a deformed leg, so he couldn't go. He was rejected. But Brownie was still in when I got home, and Mr. and Mrs. Brown had a gold star flag indicating Leonard was killed, and a blue star flag indicating Brownie is still in the Army. You know. And I can remember seeing those two little flags in the window as I walked up. I had no idea what they were, but I learned that that's what they represented. You know. So that had also an impact, and those two things, plus a time when I was with a group honoring Gold Star mothers. As I said before we started, Gold Star mothers were the only people that we mentioned or talked about, and we were honoring Gold Star mothers, but after the program was over, a dad walked up to me, and he had lost his son. Mom had already predeceased, so he was the one who got the telegram and all that. And he just said to me when he walked up, he was crying. It hadn't been but just a few months. He said, "Dad's cried too." And that really hit me. I had struggled and tried through every source that I could to get a Gold Star Mothers Memorial established in the District of Columbia. All the time, that over several years, and all that time I'd never mentioned Gold Star Dad. I'd never mentioned brothers and sisters, or aunts and uncles or grandpas. Just Gold Star Mother. And when he said that Dad's cried too, I said, we got to do something to honor these families, because the country hasn't done it, and certainly West Virginia hadn't done it. So that's why we did the very first one in 2013.
It's amazing how far it's come, and
unbelievable
how far it's going to go.
Yeah. So
so getting back to I guess when you're about ready to leave for boot camp, did you go to Camp Pendleton?
No, San Diego.
San Diego.
Yeah, we only had two training bases in in the United States: Parris Island and San Diego. And generally, everybody east of the Mississippi went to Parris Island, and everybody west of the Mississippi went to San Diego. But because we were heavily populated at that time on the East Coast, and Parris Island were getting so many they couldn't handle them. So they began forming trains of Marines. They called them troop trains, starting down in the South somewhere, and they'd come through every state and pick up 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. They picked up 6 of us in West Virginia on a train, and to take us to California, because they weren't getting as many recruits as Parris Island was. And it took us 5 days, train ride, sitting on wooden benches all the way to California. Those slotted benches, those are, now a solid bench is not the most uncomfortable thing. Those slotted benches are. So, but that's why they took us to California, was Parris Island just couldn't handle the number they were getting.
So your training started once you got on that train then?
You did, yeah, because there was a Marine in charge. Yeah.
So can you tell me, do you have any significant memories from your boot camp experience? And I know you mentioned earlier that you realized that you would be leaving the U.S.
Well, yeah, one of them that comes to my mind. During my growing up period, we had one pair of shoes. And we didn't wear those shoes during the summer months, except on special occasions. If Mom was going to take us to a funeral, then we'd have to wear our shoes. Yeah. Or if we were going to the doctor's office, we had to wear our shoes. But other than that, we went barefoot. I mean, it was just normal, you know. So when I went, I wore the only pair of shoes I had. You know, they were black shoes, low cut, of course. So we got out to San Diego, and they issued all of our equipment and uniforms and all that sort of thing. But they said, we don't have any boots for you. They were low cut ankle type boots, you know, low cut. We don't have any boots for you. They're on order, but we just don't have them to issue. So we had to wear our civilian shoes. And we were doing a lot of marching on what we called macadam. At that time, it's now blacktop, but it was macadam then. And the streets were paved with this macadam stuff, you know. So we had to walk a lot on those, and the drill field itself was covered. You know. So it wasn't long till those shoes were worn out, and I had, on the ball of my feet, on both shoes, I just worn a big old hole. Well, my foot now is on hot blacktop or hot macadam. So we cut pieces of cardboard and put in our shoes, you know, so our feet wouldn't be on the macadam, you know. And we wore those things for almost 6 weeks before they got us shoes. Now, I remember that very, very well. Yeah. They were shot. By the time we really got our boots, they were disposable. But other than that,
pretty standard.
Pretty standard, yeah.
Were they handing out the pin, the globe, and anchor once you?
No, that hadn't come into play yet. No.
So once you shipped out, you headed to the Pacific. You guys were.
Yeah.
Where did you end up to begin with?
Well, we ended up in a place called New Caledonia. We did, when we got out of boot camp, we went to a place called Jack's Farm, Jaqus. It's called Jack's Farm. I guess that's a French title, I don't know. But it was a tank farm to learn how to, as an infantry person, we call them ground pounders in the Marine Corps, but as a person who is going to do ground fighting, how do you fight with tanks? And so they took us to this tank farm to train us, give us some training of how you work with tanks. So we were there for a few weeks, and then they sent us out to Camp Pendleton, where there we actually started then infantry type training and long hikes. 10 miles was nothing. So it was a conditioning kind of thing, although we were in pretty good shape when we got out of boot camp, but we really hadn't done any long, extended hikes in boot camp, you know. So that's mostly what we were doing, is just conditioning hikes. And I woke up one morning, and when I was young, I had strep throat a lot. And of course, my throat would swell, and my mother would give me heat pads and cold compresses and all that sort of thing. So we had ice because we had milk. We had to have ice with milk, which we had to bring home every day from the ice house because you couldn't manufacture your own ice. But anyway, I had that a lot, and I woke up one morning with strep throat. Felt terrible. Had temperature, didn't know what it was, but they were going on a 10-mile hike that day. Well, then I'm not going to back out. I'm going to go. You know. So we take off, and finally we get lunch break or get to lunchtime, and we're taking a break. And I was so sick I couldn't eat anything. And I laid down to rest and passed out. And Corpsman came and checked me, and when he did, he found my temperature running 105. So they jammed me in an ambulance and rushed me back to base and put me in Naval Hospital. And finally put me in ice there. They packed me in ice to get my temperature down, and finally got some normalcy. And the doctor came in and he said, we're going to have to take your tonsils out. And of course, what am I going to do except go with what they're saying? But one of the fellows from my company came in to tell me that they were shipping out in a couple of days for overseas. And so I told the doctor, how long am I going to be here? And he told me 4 or 5 days. And I said, I can't stay. I've got to go with my outfit. And he said, we need to take your tonsils out. And I said, well, I'm going to go. So he said, okay, I'll give you a slip. So when you get aboard ship, you turn it in to the medical people, and they can take your tonsils out aboard ship. I mean, apparently there's not much to that, you know. Well, I don't know whatever happened to that slip, but I still got my tonsils. So
that's a good story.
So we landed at New Caledonia, and one of the other things that they told us when we left the continental limits of the United States, and you've probably been told this before, every letter we wrote had to be left unsealed, so that a censoring officer, usually a second lieutenant, would look at the letter and make sure that you were not saying something that the enemy could use anyway. Where you're going, where you're stationed, what you're doing, anything. And so before I left the States, I'm engaged now to this beautiful woman back in West Virginia. We got engaged just before I left for the Marine Corps. And she would have married, but she had lost an uncle in World War I. And I think that had some influence on my decision, but I said, no, when you go to war, you don't know what's going to happen, so let's just be engaged. Okay. So I bought her a very cheap ring, and we became engaged. There's a ring story I'll tell you next. And but before I left the States, I wrote her a letter and I said, we're going overseas. I can't tell you where we are or what we're doing, but I have a system that my letter first letter that I write from overseas will tell you where I am. I said, you take the first letter of every paragraph, and that will tell you where I am. So I didn't know where I was going. But I get to New Caledonia, and I have to write a great big long letter, because if you have a letter and you got N up here and an E here and a W here, it's perfectly obvious what you're doing, you know. So I had to write long paragraphs and long letter to spell out New Caledonia. Yeah. That's the longest letter she ever did get.
Yeah.
So, but she had one of these ball maps, you know. She started marking on that map where I was to keep track of me. So then we shipped out of New Caledonia, and where did we go? Guadalcanal. So, well, one of the letters that she received from the censoring, or from me, that had been censored by the censoring officer, on the bottom of the letter it said to her, "Tell Mr. Williams to quit using a code." I got caught.
They're pretty good at their job.
So somebody had already tried that apparently, and I got caught. But before I left, when I gave her the engagement ring, she decided I ought to have a ring. So she went to town and got me a wee little thin ring with a wee little teeny ruby in it. Her first name was Ruby. And so she gave me that, and she said, every time you look at that, you think of me. Pretty good psychology. It worked. So, but it was just plain metal, and it turned my fingers green as a gourd. So I'd have to clean it every once in a while, including my green finger, you know. I got a lot of kidding from the guys that, your finger's green. Yeah, well, sweat and water, yeah. But my assistant flamethrower operator, when we were on Guam, he was a 6'4" guy. And when I had the flamethrower, he had to carry everything of mine. My bedroll, my blanket, my socks, my underwear, my canteens, everything, because I got 70 pounds on my back and I ain't got any room for anything else, you know. So he'd have to carry everything else. So Vernon and I, as a result, became very close. One life depended on the other life, you know. So we're sitting in a tent one day, and I have no idea how rings came up, but his daddy had also given him a ring, but he had to wear it on this finger, and it was a big ring. It had a picture of a lake in it with trees around it. It was a beautiful thing, you know. It didn't turn his finger green. It had good stuff in it. But we were sitting talking, probably talking about home, and one or the other of us said, you know, if anything happens to me, I want you to get this ring back to Ruby. And he said the same thing about his to his dad. You know, we shook hands. Okay, I'll make sure that happens. So, but practically, well, as far as I'm concerned, I'd forgotten it. It was just, it was an agreement. Didn't think it would ever happen. So, you know. But he got killed on Iwo. And when I ran to him, he was stretched out on the ground, and there was that ring. And I remembered that promise that we had made to each other. And of course, it's illegal to take anything off of a dead Marine. And they told us that court-martial offense, you just don't do that. But I did. I took that ring off. Well, he'd had that ring on there for 2.5 years or so, and everything was brown except that one spot, which was pure white, you know. never seen the sunshine. And the minute I got it off, I saw that white, and somebody's going to know. So I rubbed sand on it, and that didn't help. And I spit in my hand and made some mud, and rubbed it on there. That kind of camouflaged it, but I stuck the ring in my pocket and went on. And when I got back to Guam, I wrote to folks and told them that I had the ring. But I was not going to ship it because I was afraid somebody would take it. So when I get home, I'll deliver it. And that's how, I guess, convinced I was going to make it. I wasn't going to get killed. And so when I got back in November, I wrote and told them that I was home and that I will be delivering that ring. And we delivered it in January 1946 to a little place called Freud, Montana. Far as you can go in Montana without becoming a Canadian. And I delivered that ring to them. And I'll never forget the emotions that took place that day. That was see, he's still buried overseas. Yeah. And that was a most precious thing to his dad. Yeah.
It must have meant a lot to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So.
So did you receive your training as a flamethrower?
Yeah, on Guadalcanal.
Guadalcanal.
Yeah.
And were you guys teamed up there?
Yeah. That's where we teamed up. They just picked people, said you, and you. You're big on this special unit, flamethrower and demolition. And neither one of us never had any training of any kind. You know, we had to learn it from scratch. We'd never seen a flamethrower before until we got those in a big crate. They shipped them in.
And what was your first impression of it?
Well, I don't know about my first impression, I guess. I remember my first impression when we finally got the thing put together, and now we're going to go out in the field and test it. I remember that. When the crate came in, big wooden crate with this flamethrower in it, it also had a package in there in some form of a cellophane that was a powder. And it indicated on the package that it had phosphorus in it. And it gave a mixture, like a recipe, of mixing that with gasoline. And that would turn it into a kind of a gel. We called it, for the want of a better name, phosphorus gel. But when we mixed it with the gasoline, it did turn it into a liquid stuff. And we would set it on fire as it left the flamethrower, and then if it landed on you, it's burning, and you can't rub it off. You know, if you rub it, you just spread it, and you can even stick it under water, and it'll still burn. The water won't kill it because it's got that phosphorus in it. You know? So I remember going out to the field, and we'd never shot this thing before, or, you know. So you're shooting it from hip level, and you've only got about 72 seconds of air to propel it, and you've only got 4.5 gallons of fuel in your tanks. But we would fire it, and it would be like a water hose. It would just be one single stream going out, and by the time you got it on a target, if the target was reasonably small, by the time you found the target with it, you're out of stuff. you know. And I remember doing that, and then, of course, watching it burn, but having it just in one single stream was a tremendous disadvantage. This thing, you just can't reach around and grab another one. You got to go someplace else to get another one that is ready to go, you know. And my gunnery sergeant, the gunnery sergeant was in charge of our unit. He didn't like it at all. And so we began experimenting. We had no instructions. There was no book with it to tell us how to do all this stuff. There was a book that had all the part numbers in it, how to take it apart and put it back together. But how you'd use it in combat, there was nothing. No instructions about that at all. So he didn't like it, so we began experimenting with fluids. I can't remember the sequence, but we tried motor oil, and that was too heavy. It didn't go anywhere because the air pressure wasn't strong enough to shoot it much distance. We tried kerosene, and that didn't work either because kerosene doesn't burn hot. It's a slow burner, so that didn't work. So then we got into diesel. Well, we didn't have access to diesel. You know, we weren't in a mechanized outfit, so we didn't have diesel. But we got some, or he got it. I don't know where he got it, but we got some diesel. And then we began mixing it with gasoline. But the gasoline and all those vehicles at that time was only 82 octane, which doesn't make it burn very hot, you know. And where he got the idea, I have no idea. But he decided we needed airplane gasoline because it was 130 octane. And he being a gunnery sergeant, he had access to a Jeep. So he left the camp one day, and when he came back, he had a 55-gallon drum of airplane gasoline. Didn't tell anybody where he got it or how he got it, but there he is with it, you know. So we began using that and mixing it together with diesel fuel, and we finally got a mixture that he was satisfied with. And it burned very, very hot. It was more gasoline than diesel, but diesel gave it enough body that it would go 15 or 20 yards. You know? And if you just shot it into the air, it would only go 15 to 20 yards because the air resistance would stop the flame. So he developed a procedure, and I think we were the only people using it. I'm not sure of that, but I haven't ever talked to anybody else that's used it, that we fire it, but instead of shooting it into the air, which you normally do with a rifle, you shoot it at the body. Shoot it on the ground about 15 yards in front of you like a great big ball of flame. And do a 3 to 4 second bursts, and this thing just turns into a great big orange fireball. And it'll roll. And you can roll it for 10 or 15 yards before it burns out. So that was a system we finally developed. And it worked like a clock as far as we were concerned, because you could get pretty close to a pillbox or a cave and fire it on the ground, and it would roll right in there. You know, where if you shot it in the air, it probably wouldn't even reach the target.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he figured that out. We didn't, you know? But that's how we were trained to use those.
This was all developed on Guadalcanal.
Yeah.
Through testing and trial and error.
That's right.
That's amazing.
A lot of people said, well, you're carrying an explosive on your back, but we even tried to explode it. We put it out there, shot at it with rifles and machine guns to see if we could penetrate the metal that would cause it to explode. Because if you got the thing on your back and it explodes, you become a rocket. You know, we never could. The hose that furnished the fuel to the gun, which was a rubber hose with a spring inside of it so it wouldn't kink, you could shoot that into, you know. But as far as setting on fire or blowing it up, you couldn't do it. We tried it. And I had them zing off of the back of my air tank on Iwo Jima. I had Japanese Nambu shooting at me, and the bullets were hitting the air tank on the back and zooming into the air, So fortunately they went that way instead of that way, or I wouldn't be talking to you. But you couldn't, the metal was so thick and you couldn't get a good sharp hit on it. There's no, yeah.
It was rounded.
Yeah, so rounded, Yeah. It's like trying to get a good shot hit on this. It's going to go one way or the other. It's not going to.
It actually, you could say it protected you.
It did.
Yeah, I'm sure the Japanese were aiming at it, hoping that it would explode.
Yes. Or at least get you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do I want to say this? Did you? I mean, you accepted the responsibility of being a flamethrower and going through that training. Were you okay with that? I mean,
sure.
Whatever you were told,
goes back to my basics. This is your job. So you just do it the very, very best that you can. I mean, I never questioned why was I selected to do this. I never questioned that whatsoever. As far as I know, none of the other guys did either. We just became a team.
And just a few questions. When you fire the flamethrower, can you feel the heat from the flamethrower?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you best make sure that you don't have an incoming wind.
That was my next question.
We had to learn that, yeah. And of course, you don't always have the opportunity to decide that. That was another advantage of firing it onto the ground and rolling it, because you didn't get as much wind resistance, and there was less chance of it being blown back at you because it's rolling on the ground. Like if you fire it into the air and the wind catches it and it's blowing towards you, there's only one way it's going to go, and that's right back at you. See? So that was the other advantage of shooting it on the ground, rolling it, But when we first started, it wasn't unusual that you burn all the hair off your arms and hands, and scorch your eyebrows. So, you have to go through that to learn. You got to be done before you can get smart.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, after you went through all this training, you'd been assigned to the 3rd Marines at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, can you tell me about your experiences leading up to and heading to Guam?
Okay. Well, we shipped out of Guadalcanal.
Okay.
And we, the lower troops, didn't know it at the time, but we were scheduled to be a backup for the 2nd Marine Division that was taking Saipan and Tinian. So we sailed from Guadalcanal, and of course we're out in the ocean, you can't see a thing, nothing around anywhere. But we actually became stationary off of Saipan, and we were there for several days to see if they were going to need us to come in and help with Saipan. Finally, somebody decided weren't going to. Well, by that time we'd eaten up all the chow and we needed refurbished on the ship. So we went back to the island, Marshall Islands, which had already been taken by the Marines, and now become a storage area where they were storing supplies and stuff. And we went back there and anchored, and then we Marines had to go ashore and pick up stuff, bringing it back aboard ship, all kinds of stuff. Refurbish our own ship. So we did that. And when we got that done, then we set sail again and went out into the ocean, and we still didn't know where we were going. Nobody had told us, because anybody didn't want any of us to share anything with anybody else, I guess. But then we were told we're going to Guam.
That would have been a short letter for you to write.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. So Then we beached at Guam just a few days after we were told that's where we were going to go, and they brought out a diagram of what Guam looked like, and basically where we were going to hit at the beach area. Again, is up that way, and this is clear beach area. There are some pillboxes built on the beach, and of course it showed a real high mountain just off of the beach. It showed that, so that's where we were going to hit. But when we weren't in the flamethrower operation situation, we were just a rifleman, and that's how we were trained. So when I went ashore, I was just a rifleman, carrying a carbine, which I thought was a terrible weapon. As soon as I got an opportunity, if I could find an M1 rifle that somebody had dropped because they were wounded or killed and the rifle was still there, I'd throw that carbine away and grab that M1 rifle, because I could hit something with that. And that carbine, I couldn't hit the side of a house with it. So we were just plain rifle people when we hit ashore. Well, day or so later, we're trying to take this hill. There was suspicion that there were caves, so they put a flamethrower. We had to use a flamethrower, wear one anyway. But we only wore it for a day or two because somebody realized that you couldn't dig caves in that mountain because it's almost all coral rock, So we got rid of the flamethrowers. I never used a flamethrower on Guam at all. Once we got to the top of what is now known as Nimitz Ridge, which took us 5 days, because every time we'd try to climb, the Japanese were on top, they'd kick us back. As Chesty Puller one time said, we never retreat. We just advance to the rear. So we would advance to the rear and then try again, And but once we got the ridge taken and settled in, and then shortly thereafter we got in jungle. So flamethrowers were just useless. Never did use one. And
so this was your first experience, your first combat experience.
Yeah. That was the first one. Yeah.
So was that a bit of a wake-up call for you?
Oh, absolutely. It's strange how fate works. We don't quite understand fate, or at least I don't. When I was on Guadalcanal, I was a Browning automatic rifle person in a squad. We had sections in the squad with 3 men to a section. We had 2 riflemen and a BAR man, and there were 4 of those in a 13-man squad. We had a squad leader and then those units, and I was a BAR man. Well, when I was selected for flamethrower group, somebody else took my place as a BAR man. Well, on Guadalcanal, that person that filled in my slot, on either the fourth or fifth night, we got banzai'd. The Japanese just swarmed, crazy. And he was on an outpost out in front, he and another Marine, out in front of us to warn us that they're coming. Well, they didn't really have to warn us, because when they started, they were just yelling and screaming, and you could hear them coming a long ways away. But They overran his position, and of course he was killed. So had I not changed from BA airman to a flamethrower operator, that would have been me in that hole out there. So fate just has a way of doing things differently, I guess. But
was that on Guam or on?
That was out in Guam. Yeah. And then once we got into the jungles, the flamethrower just wouldn't have been feasible because you got a fire. You set the jungle on fire, you have no control of it. See? So nobody used flamethrowers on Guam that I know of. And
did that bonsai attack? Did they reach your position?
Oh yeah, they overran us and got clear through behind our lines into our medical unit. Aid stations killed the number of people back there. Yeah. But you can't stop them all, just a swarm, and you can't get them all. And they broke through. But
so how do you reset the line? How do you reform after that?
We had foxholes. Everybody had to dig a foxhole, and you had to dig it big enough for two people, two Marines, so that one can be on watch while the other one sleeps, and you rotate every hour. In other words, every hour you're on hour. You wake up the guy that's sleeping, then he takes the hour, and you sleep. So you do that all night long. And of course, we had passwords that if you had to leave the line for something, leave your foxhole, anybody could challenge you. And everybody knew what the password was. So the person would say, let's challenge you, what's the password? And you'd have to give him the password, then he would have to give you back his password, see? So you know that you're talking to a Marine, not a Japanese, because some of those people could talk as well as we could, And once daylight came, they hit just at dawn. And once full daylight came, then, of course, we searched them out, and wherever we found them, we killed them. That had gotten through our lines. So then we reorganized, reset up, and go again.
So
we got two of those while we were there.
Both on Guam?
Yeah, both on Guam.
That's sort of a suicide mission for them in a sense.
It is. Yeah, it is. They know some of them are going to go through, and some of them are going to get killed. But the big factor between the American and the Japanese was, in my opinion, for them to die in war was an honor. For we Americans, we're going to do everything we possibly can to survive. Not only ourselves, but to help the other guy survive too. And which makes a very difficult fight, because that person coming at you, if you kill him, then he gets an honor, So that makes him more vicious, more anxious, and more committed, because now he's going to get a reward, even if he gets killed.
Different type of motivation.
Yeah. And we sort of have that in the world today. You put this pack on your back, you're going to die.
Sure.
And we never hear of an American doing that sort of thing, because our philosophy of life is just so different that we're going to try to do everything to preserve it, where the other guy is doing everything that he can to sacrifice it. Makes a difference. Yeah.
Now, it's my understanding taking Guam was extremely significant in the sense that it was it was originally an American territory,
Yes,
taken by the Japanese.
yes.
So retaking it was significant in that sense.
It was. It was. And I'm sure for some Marines on there, it wasn't in my case because I knew nothing about. I didn't even know that we owned the island. I didn't know it was an American possession, you know. But for some of the Marines who had been in for a while, it was kind of a revenge fulfilling thing, because they had they'd killed practically every American except those they were using for labor or something of that nature on the island, you know. So for some of those older Marines that had been in a while and knew all the background, for them it was, I'll get my revenge, you know.
Are there any other experiences on Guam that stick out in your memory?
No, it really to our outfit, it really wasn't a real tough fight. Once we got into the jungle area, the Japanese could not have formations in the jungle, but they were tremendously good at camouflage. That was the greatest fear, as far as I'm concerned, is that guy would camouflage himself to the point that you couldn't find him, couldn't locate him, and yet he can see you. And that creates a tremendous amount of anxiety, because you don't know whether he's hiding in that tree or behind that tree or covered over with grass or, you know, whatever. So the anxiety, when you can't see, it's an unknown, it really creates, in my estimation, a very deep anxiety. And we had a lot of that. Just people couldn't stand that pressure.
It's understandable.
Yeah.
Seems like any movement or noise.
That's right. Frogs. My goodness, there are a million frogs, or at that time on Guam, in the jungles. Great big suckers. They were big as a hot cake, you know. They were huge. And where we had bombed the place, there were bomb craters, so it rained a lot on Guam. It just rained. And they would fill up with water, and those frogs, I don't know where they came from, but they'd get in those holes, those bomb craters that were full of water, and of course at night they're making all kinds of noise, you know. Yeah. Well, and one would move or jump in the jungle. Well, we probably wasted more ammunition on frogs than we did the Japanese. Because somebody starts shooting, well, nobody sees anything, so everybody just starts shooting. You know? So I remember one occasion, the outfit that we were relieving had already reached the beach on the far side of the island. They had reached the beach. Now they were we're being their relief. We're relieving them. They're coming out. We're going in. Well, there's just a path in the jungle, very narrow, and of course they're more dirty and cruddy than we are, because they've been in their uniform for days on end, and most of us had run out of cigarettes, because no way you could get supplies, you know. So I see that we're going down a hill toward the beach, and this group was coming up. Well, one of the guys walking out was walking up the hill with a cigarette stuck in his mouth, you know, smoking it on the way. And when I looked up and saw him with that cigarette in his mouth, I got somewhere in there said, "You got to get that cigarette." Well, as he went by, I reached over and grabbed that cigarette out of his mouth. course, but they're moving. The guy right behind him is, pushing him on. But oh, he called me some real nasty names because I took his cigarette. But I enjoyed that cigarette.
It's like going on escalators, passing each other.
That's right. Yeah, I enjoyed that cigarette.
So after you guys retook the island, how much longer did you stay there, or did you guys?
Well, we stayed there until Iwo.
Mm-hmm.
We secured it in August, and then we stayed until Iwo, and then after Iwo, we came back to our same tent that we left. One of the things that was to me unusual about Guam was because of the coral rock. You really couldn't dig holes, and we didn't have a whole. An infantry outfit doesn't have a whole lot of equipment to do stuff with. We have mattocks and shovels and hoes and saws and all that sort of thing. The maintenance shop to take care of the vehicles. But to dig a hole in that coral rock, all we had was a pick and a shovel, and you could try, but the pick would just bounce off of rock. Well, I'm a demolition guy, and all we had at that time available to us in the way of explosives were quarter-pound blocks of TNT. And as an explosive guy, I kept a box of TNT under my bunk all the time. And of course, most guys they don't trust TNT any more than they trust dynamite. It's still an explosive. But I knew enough about it that it's not going to explode. But I used that TNT to make up hand grenades, so that instead of using real hand grenades, which they wouldn't let us use because of the hazard of somebody getting killed with them, we didn't have enough dummy hand grenades that would take care of us. And anytime you would use them, you'd lose some of them, because you throw it, and then you can't find the doggone thing after you throw it. So I'd use quarter-pound blocks of TNT and put a fuse on it with about a 6-second fuse, and we could go out into the field and train, and they could pull the fuse and throw the quarter-pound block of TNT. Well, it would simulate a grenade, and it'd tell you at least where you hit. Where a dummy, it didn't do anything, just hit the ground. But this thing would explode, and the guys liked that sort of thing. So I'd make up a whole bunch of those when we went out for training, and they'd throw them and they'd go off, and that was a lot of fun, 18, 19-year-olds. But we're trying to dig holes for garbage pits and heads and that sort of thing. It was just almost impossible. So my first sergeant asked me if I could figure out some way that we could do two things. Number one, catch water, because we had to have the water pulled in, hauled in, if we got water at all, by some other outfit, because we had no way of doing it, And one to catch water, and the other thing was to dig a hole so we could have heads and garbage pits and all that. So for the barrels, we had primacord, what we called a primacord, which was an explosive cord. And it was made to wrap around something and blow it. And to be able to set different explosives, and this primacord would explode and set the explosives off. So that was the purpose of the primacord. It came in a big roll. So I used that primacord and put it all the way around the top of a 55-gallon metal drum, and that we either got oil in or cooking oil or oil for the vehicles or whatever. But we had 55-gallon drums, and they were, for whatever reason, they were black. I don't know why, but I just put that primer cord around the top and set it off, and it would just cut that lid out of there just as slick as a whistle, you know. So I have no idea how many, and we'd set them on the corner of each tent, because a tent built like that, the water had a tendency to run off to a certain spot, you know. So we'd set it under the corner of the tent and fill up, and that's what we'd use to wash our clothes with and take our showers with and all that, you know. So that went over big. So then, figuring out digging a hole, I went over to the maintenance shop and asked them if they had an old axle. And they had some axles out of Jeeps. The Jeeps were gone, but they had the axles. And I asked them to sharpen the axle, which was about 3 feet long, the axle was. Had a cog on top of it that fit into the differential. And sharpen the point of the other end of the axle to a real sharp point. And then I would take, I always had helpers. I could get helpers, PFCs and privates. They had to do the work. I'd give them a 12-pound sledgehammer, and I'd hold that axle, and they would hit it on the cog and drive it into the ground 3 or 4 inches. Well, it was really into the rock, coral rock. And we'd do that many, many places in a square or round, either way, and keep doing it until we got down to 4 or 5 inches deep. And then the box of TNT I kept under my bunk. You can't stick a 1/4 pound block of TNT in a little hole, so I'd have to crush the TNT. And I would sit there with an empty grenade box and that axle, and I'd drop a 1/4 pound block in that empty box and just take the cog part and sit there and, you know, just crush it. Well, guys would walk in and see me do that. Take off like the wind, you know. They knew nothing about it. They're going to get blown up. But I'd crush it, and then I'd take that crushed TNT and drop it in that hole, put a fuse in it and set it off, and wire those all together so it'd go boom, and it would loosen all the, for a space, loosen all the ground. Then I'd have the guys shovel it out, and we'd just do it again and shovel it out and do it again. Well, we could dig pits like that, you know. And so I became pretty popular in my outfit. I think I was the only guy doing that sort of thing. And so, but
a lot of work.
A lot of work, but I remember those guys sticking their head in the tent and really taking off.
I could imagine the looks on their face. So, can we talk about, I guess, the day, you know, your preparation for EWO, getting to EWO, and actually landing on
we had no idea where we were going. We were told you're shipping out, you know, and we knew we were going into combat. We knew that, but we had no idea where. So we all, of course, the whole division got on ships, and between Guam and EWO, we were up on top deck, and they were calling us in by groups because they couldn't get everybody on top deck at one time, and briefing us as to where we were going. And they had a diagram that showed the outline of what Iwo Jima looked like, but no indication of caves or pillboxes or anything. They didn't know,
This is just like a silhouette of
yeah, silhouette of the island, yeah. And basically where, if we were going to land, where we would hit the beach, you know. But there again, we were told that we probably would never see the place, you know, never have to get off ship because of its size. It was only 2.5 miles by 5, and Guam was well, 3 times that big or bigger than that, you know. It was something like 19 miles across Guam, and so no one could dream, at least we in the lower echelon couldn't dream of even why we were taking the little place. You know, it didn't show anything in the way of buildings or nothing. No.
Just a rock in the
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So I don't think, or at least I didn't, and I don't remember anybody taking it very seriously, that we were really going to be involved in combat. You know. And but when we finally got there and stopped, we didn't know where we were, of course, but we couldn't even see the island from where we were anchored. Way out in the ocean, we could hear an explosive every once in a while. And we'd see an airplane once in a while, a fighter go zipping by, you know. But other than that, we couldn't tell anything that was going on. That the first day, then of course that night, the first night, about midnight or so, the speakers came on, and now hear this. Chow 3 o'clock, and we're disembarking at 5 o'clock, which told us, of course, we were going ashore. You know. So everybody got up and went to chow and got their stuff together, and then just before daylight, we started down the ropes. They had a gangway or gangplank that ran down the side of the ship that you could walk up steps and get on the ship. Had about a 4x4 platform at the bottom of the steps that you could step off of the boat onto that and then walk up the steps to the top deck. And but all those Marines couldn't go down that one gangway, so we went down ropes that were hanging over the sides of the ship, and they could unload on both sides. You know, it was still dark, but they told us that in briefing us that the Navy would be controlling the boat, and they will hold on to the rope, you know, in the boat, so that the rope won't come out of the boat and you'd be hanging out in midair someplace. And that be sure going down the ropes, that instead of holding on to the thing which would be normal, hold on this way. Because if you're this way and it's dark and the guy in front of you, or coming down ahead of you, in front of you, if he steps on both of your hands, you're pinned. You can't get away. So you got to hang on to the vertical rather than the horizontal. Okay. So they did not tell us, or at least I didn't hear it if they did, that the waves were high. Most of us knew nothing about oceans anyway, but the waves were running 10 to 12 feet. And that boat, of course, is going up and down and up and down. Well, they only have about 4 men in the boat. They have a coxswain and a motor mac, and usually 2 helpers on each boat. And they are the guys that are supposed to hang on to the rope and keep it in the boat. And you can't see anything because there's no lights. You're not allowed to even light a cigarette, nothing. We had 2 gunnery sergeants that were going down first. They're our leaders. One of them was to replace the older gunnery sergeant that had been there for two and a half years. He was supposed to go home. And the new gunnery sergeant came in. The old gunnery wouldn't leave. He said, no, I'm not going home. I don't want to go home. He had no family. He said, I want to stay here. So they're both going down the ropes ahead of us. We can't see them, but they're ahead of us. And the guys in the Navy guys in the boat are hanging on to the rope. Well, the boat went down. Well, first it went up. The rope was slack, the ladder. Then when it went down, they held on to it. And when it did, it was like a rubber band. It flipped both of those gunnery sergeants clear off the ropes. They landed in the ocean. And it's dark. Now, the packs that we had on our backs had our blanket roll across the top of it, strapped on, and our packs were packed with our our mess kit and stuff like that, skivvies and socks and whatever we could get in there, shaving equipment. So they had a little flotation to it, and fortunately it did, because the first gunnery sergeant, the guys in the boat saw him land, and he landed right close to the boat, so they got him out immediately. But the other one went clear over the boat, and he floated down to the next boat, and if he was yelling. That's how they found him, So they rescued him. But neither one of them then could go ashore, They had to go back aboard ship. But we got off finally into Higgins' boats and took off out into the ocean. It got daylight. Now there's a whole group of these from other ships that are, we couldn't be all on one ship, that are in Higgins boats, and they're going around 12 or so of those Higgins boats just going around in a circle. And there'd be a circle here and a circle there and another one over there, where they're just going around, 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 around. And they called it a rendezvous area. And they had the circle until the people ashore would give them a signal of some kind to come in, And because you have a beach master in there that is in control of everything that happens on that beach, And he's the guy that's got to give the signal, okay, come on in. Now, that only works after they hit the beach, because there's nobody there before the first group. Wave one, there's nobody saying come in. You're just going, But we went around in those things all day long, because the Marines ashore had not been able to advance enough because of the heavy fire and casualties and all of that, to have enough ground that we could come in behind them. There was just no place to go. So even though we'd circled those things all day long, we went back aboard ship that night again. And I have said I think we were the only outfit in the history of the Navy that ever got 2 steak and egg breakfasts before combat. We got 2.
They feed you good before you went into combat?
Yeah. But finally, when we did get ashore, one of the Marine divisions, 4th, had been able to advance around Mount Suribachi, which gave us room to come in. But it was so chaotic. It's just unbelievable at the equipment that is on the beach, and there's just gear scattered everywhere. We had so many casualties and loss of life that first day. One of the visions that has never left my mind, and I try not to think about it any more than I have to, are those Marines that had lost their lives, and they had no place to bury them because we didn't have enough ground, first of all. They'd rolled them in their ponchos. All of us had ponchos against bad weather, rainy weather, which usually wrapped around our bedroll. And they'd rolled those individuals up in their ponchos and had just stacked them, like we used to do on the farm. We called it a cordwood, just so long and so high, and then you'd go and build another one. And that vision has never left my mind. That's just unbelievable. But finally we established 3 cemeteries on Iwo. Each division built their own cemetery in order to take care of those that we'd lost. They'd used a bulldozer, and the reason I know this is I was sent back to the beach area to get some blasting caps, and I saw this, otherwise I would have never seen it, but they had taken a bulldozer and dug a trench about 8 foot deep, about 8 foot wide and probably 6 feet deep. And then they took the bodies and placed them in those trenches and stretched a rope across in front of, at the head of the bodies, put a dog tag on each place so they'd know who that person was in that location, and then covered them over until the cemeteries were completed. And then they moved them from there to the cemetery. But,
and when did you realize that it wasn't going to be as easy as Guam? It wasn't going to be, when I say easy, in relative terms.
Only until we hit the beach. Because when we were on those Higgins boats out there running around, we had no communication with the beach whatsoever. We were still so far out we couldn't see what was going on. We were, at that point, you could see smoke and hear explosives. And particularly the planes that were bombing, you'd see a plane go by, and then you'd hear a bomb go off. But so far as ground, being able to see the ground or anything like that, we had no vision of that at all until we got ashore.
But did you, because I guess initially the estimations were that Iwo would have been taken within a few days.
3 to 5 days.
So after you'd landed on Iwo, was it instantly or a matter of days that you realized that this is going to be a much tougher fight to take the island?
Oh, I think we realized that from the moment we hit, because they are still bombing or mortaring and using machine gun on the beach areas, particularly from Suribachi, because we're about probably 750 to 1,000 yards from the foot of Suribachi, and they had not actually secured Suribachi yet. They're still figuring out how they're going to take that thing, which they didn't. We went in on the 21st. They didn't get Suribachi secured until the 23rd. So they're still shooting machine guns and throwing mortars from Suribachi when we got there. So our first assignment, my outfit's first assignment, regiment, was to go to the edge of the airfield, dig in, and then advance across the airfield. Because on the other side of the airfield, which we didn't know, on the other side of the airfield were these reinforced concrete pillboxes. They didn't have any pillboxes on the beach. They had them around the airfield. And our job was to go across the airfield and go through those pillboxes or by those pillboxes. One of the maps I have someplace that indicates that they had 800 pillboxes on Iwo Jima total. Some of them were one-man things, some of them were bigger than that. Some of them would house 15, 20 people. And they had built them in kind of I would call it a pod for the want of another name, but they built them in kind of 3 to a group or something that you couldn't hardly get to one without one of the other 2 being able to see you, so they could get you in a crossfire. And they were reinforced concrete pillboxes. They had what we call rebar today, was just, to us, just bars back in those days, metal bars. They had put that in the concrete, so even though a bomb hit it or you'd hit it with a piece of artillery, it might knock a hole in the concrete, but it didn't penetrate it, and it didn't kill the people inside. So that, after we got across the airfield, well, we were still on the ocean side of the airfield on the 23rd when the flag went up. And shortly after the flag went up, then that's when we moved out to cross the airfield. And we'd been there for now 2 days. Just no place to go. You just couldn't advance. And now we're going to go across the airfield. There's no protection on the airfield. So we lost a tremendous number of Marines just getting across the airfield from mortars and machine guns, because you'd find a pothole or shell hole of some kind. You'd try to pick that before you jump up and run, so that you would land someplace that might have a little protection. And there would be far too many Marines in each little hole, because everybody's looking for something to get into, you know. Of course, once you jump up to run across, then you're in a standing position, or at least a semi-standing position. And once we got across, then we tried to break through those lines of pillboxes. And they had all the advantage in that they had an aperture in the front of it, clear across the front, where they could stand inside and shoot out that aperture with machine gun or rifle. And they've got a whole field of fire out here because there's nothing to get behind or under or to protect you. So every time we would advance to try to break through, they would open up on us and we'd have to back off. As Jesse said, we'd have to advance to the rear because we just couldn't go. And we always lost a bunch of Marines every time we tried that. So they'd get some of us. And finally, after the flag went up, on the afternoon of the flag went up, we'd gotten across the airfield but hit these pillboxes. My commanding officer had lost all of his officers except 2, either wounded or killed, and most of the squad leaders were gone. And we still had 1 gunnery sergeant, but he called for a meeting of all of those. They called it an NCO meeting. Well, normally you have to be a sergeant or above to be considered an NCO, and I was a corporal, acting sergeant, but not. I didn't have any stripes. And when they called the meeting, the first sergeant passed a word that everybody's go to all NCOs to go to this meeting in a shell crater, a bomb crater, so they could get down below ground level at least and have some protection that way, I wasn't going to go. Well, I'm a corporal. And so the first sergeant came to him and he said, you are to go. All right, here again, no questions. Why me? I didn't say that. So I went to the meeting, and we got down in this shell crater, and there were probably 10, 12 of us around the edge of the crater. And Captain Beck was actually trying to figure out what do we do now at this point? And that's when he asked me if I thought I could do something with a flamethrower against some of these pillboxes. The 6 Marines that I'd had in my little unit when we hit the beach on the 21st, they were gone. I didn't know whether they had been killed or wounded. I had no way of knowing that information because you don't stand around and talk with each other. It's one of these things you just keep on going. So I didn't know what happened to them. I just knew they weren't there. And I don't remember what I said. The guys in the shell crater, after we got back to Guam, when they were being questioned, they said, my response was, I'll try. I probably did say that. I didn't say, I don't want to do this. But anyway, he gave me, told me to get 4 Marines to help me. And by that time, our unit is so broken up, you don't know who belongs to what squad or anything, because there is no organization anymore. You're just in a group, so to speak. And you're looking for leadership, and of course the commanding officer is the boss, and the gunnery sergeant is the second boss, so it doesn't make any difference who the other people are, So I just picked 4 guys. 2 of them I had no idea who they were. They weren't even from my platoon. I didn't know them. The other 2 I did. And so I just picked those 4 guys and said, here's what you're supposed to do. And I assigned them the duty. I put 2 on one side in an area, and 2 on the other side in an area. That these pillboxes are out here. Well, your job is whatever pillbox I'm going to, that's the one you shoot at, keep them from being able to get me. And one of the other individuals, I selected to go with me, that was supposed to be what we called a pole charge man. Never did have any use for him on Guam because we didn't have any caves. But pole charge man's job was that we had built a lot of we called them pole chargers. It was about an 8-foot piece of 2x2, and with a 12-foot board nailed to the end of it, and we just put explosives on that board and put a fuse back to the a carrier, and he'd pull the fuse and set it off and set that explosive off on the end of that board. Well, his job was, if it was a cave, is to take that thing in the cave as far as it would go and set it off, so to seal the cave. If it was a pillbox, he's supposed to stick it in that aperture and set it off, so that kill everybody inside. Well, his name was Schelager, and so he's to follow me. Wherever I go, he's supposed to be right behind me. And so we get out close to the pillboxes, and we get in a shell crater, a big old deep shell crater, and so that I can tell him what I'm going to do. And so I tell him the number 1 pillbox I'm going after is that one right there, and you follow me. Well, I crawl up out of the shell crater, and I can remember telling him, stay low, Stay down on the ground. Well, that's what I was doing. I was crawling. Rather than standing up or bending over and going, I was crawling. And I crawled up out of the shell crater and started crawling forward, and he's behind me. And when he comes up out of the shell crater, for whatever reason, he stood up just a little ways, just hunched over, and a bullet hit him right there in the helmet. Penetrated the helmet, but not the liner inside. It was fiberglass. And when it penetrated the helmet, hit the fiberglass, it was coming in from this direction. It went around and stopped right back here, you know. But when that hit him with such force, it threw him back in the shell crater. He just, you know, way over backwards. And can't remember how I knew that happened. I don't know whether I heard him or whether he yelled, or I don't know. But when I looked around, he wasn't there. So I crawled back in the hole with him, back in the shell crater. And when I got down there, well, he's still, his eyes are rolling around. But he's alive, you know. And I don't remember our conversation, whether, you know. But anyway, I left him there because he's done. He's done. And then I went on to work by myself. Never did have a pole charge man. I didn't have anybody come out and volunteer either. So
you're crawling around with the flamethrower,
yes.
70 pounds.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of weight weighing you down.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, based on the citation that I read, in total you took out 7 of those pillboxes.
That's true.
And I understand they used multiple flamethrowers.
6, yeah,
6 in total.
6 of them. One of the things that's bothered me all my life, still does, how did I get the other 5 flamethrowers? I don't know whether it was fear or not important. I have no answer. I've even talked to psychologists, because I work in VA medical centers a lot, and we have psychologists running around. Don't know all the answers. Why can't I remember that? And I've had different answers, but the primary, most acceptable one to me is you didn't want to remember it. It didn't have any bearing. It was just something that had to be done, so you did it, and it never got in your memory bank. Well, that's true or not, I don't know. But I have no memory of being able to, we had probably 40 flamethrowers serviced, ready to go, that we took with us when we hit the island, you know. They were in our company supply unit. I knew where they were. I made sure that they were ready to go, because my job was to make sure those 6 guys with the companies had whatever they needed to do their job. And their job was to, if the platoon leader wanted a flamethrower or a demolition job done, that was their job. He'd just tell them, hey, seal that cave or blow up that thing, you know. And then their job was to get the equipment and do it with, you know. They didn't carry all that stuff with them because they're a fighting Marine. They're fighting along with everybody else. But I still don't know how I went back to where the supply was. I have said jokingly many times, I don't think there was a Marine back there yelled and said, just wait, I'll bring you one. I don't think that ever happened, you know. But I still can't remember how I got them. I know I can remember peeling out of a couple because they were useless. I'd used up all the fluid or all my air, and they had quick snaps. One around the waist and one around the chest, and I'd just flip them and, you know, roll out the harness and let it lay. It's useless. It's done. You know.
And do you know the distance that you'd have to crawl?
Have no idea.
If you were to estimate, you wouldn't be able to.
No, sir, I do not. And I don't know that when I went to get them, I don't think, this is my own reasonable thinking, that I would have crawled all that distance. I think I would have run both ways, which, if somebody's shooting at you, you're going to get to where you're going to go the fastest way you know how to do it. So in my own estimation, I would have run to a safe area at least, then do the same thing on the way back, wherever that safe area is. But boy, it's just as blank as can be.
Moving targets harder to hit.
That's right. Sure.
So the four men that you chose, the riflemen, as you mentioned, they would aim at the particular aperture to stop the firing.
Yeah.
And with a flamethrower, would you have to get right up next to that pillbox, or did you?
I could be 20 yards, 30 yards away. If I can roll it into the pillbox. Yeah.
And it would still be effective.
Still be effective. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, two of those individuals, and which I didn't know their names, I didn't know that they'd sacrificed their life. I had no way of knowing that until long time after Iwo Jima. Then I found out, and I'm not even quite sure how I found out, that two of those individuals working with me had been killed.
During that.
Yeah, during that period. But I didn't know who they were. Didn't know their names. Now I do, but it wasn't until October a year ago that we finally learned by deduction, if you will, who they were. I'm going to take a break and get a drink of water in a moment. But for years I said, in fact, this plaque here on the wall is sort of indicative of that occasion. And in their honor, it had to be back on Guam that I learned that two of those individuals had been killed, still not knowing who they were. And last October, a year ago, a Marine captain who was at San Diego and a guy that works for UPS, runs their veterans program for UPS. He's kind of a computer whiz. They got together, since we were going to California to the Marine base, they got to talking with each other, and he's a Marine also. And he was telling them about this incident and about me and all that. So they began doing research. And they finally found that on February the 23rd, in that particular section of the island, two Marines from C Company, which was my outfit, were killed on the afternoon of February 23rd. They were the only two Marines that the records show that got killed that day from my company. So by deduction, there's no proof. Because of the factors, they came to the conclusion, and they've convinced me, that that were the two Marines. I'll show you something. Get me a drink of water and I'll show you. Starting in World War I, the mothers of some of those serving in World War I overseas received notices of the loss of a son, because most of them were single individuals that weren't married, and most of the people in the war were sons rather than fathers. So the notices were coming in, but the communities had no way of identifying the fact that this family lost a loved one. So the mothers discovered or formed an organization and decided they'd use a small gold star flag to signify that this family lost a loved one. And that's where Gold Star comes from. And they did that during the war. They first had a blue star and indicating the person was on active duty, and then if the person lost their life, they put the gold over the blue, and that made it a gold star to say that that person is now deceased. And they did that during World War I. Then we quit. During the peacetime period between 1 and 2, that system wasn't used at all. Well, then when World War II started, that system came back into play again. So families began doing the same thing. Put a blue star for those on active duty, a gold star if that person lost their life. My mother had 3 blue stars hanging in her window, which indicated to the people in the community, this home has 3 people in the war. And fortunately, all 3 of us got home. But one of my school friends, he didn't, so they had 2 blue stars in their window, and then when he lost his life, one of those turned gold. And so it didn't take off or didn't get any recognition in the Vietnam War, hardly at all. It's just something we didn't do, or the Korean War we didn't do. But during the Iraq-Afghanistan, it began to come back into play to a small degree. So over the period of the last 10 years or so, it has grown. Now we have organizations that we have a Gold Star Wives organization, we have Gold Star Mothers organization, national. These are national organizations. So for about 15 years, because of my experience with my school friend and the experience that I had delivering some of the telegrams just before World War II to families that had lost a loved one, I decided we needed to do something to recognize the Gold Star mothers. So I had an artist help me draw up a concept of what we thought, he and I thought, would be a suitable recognition and honor and tribute to a Gold Star mother in our nation's capital, since it does not have anything anywhere out of 1,100 monuments and memorials and statues and all of that that pays any tribute or honor to the families who have certainly given more than any of us, because they lost one of their own. And I thought we ought to have something in our capital that would signify that loss and honor that mother. So I tried to find some people with money that would be willing to do that. I attempted to get my congressional people to support it and push it and get it done. I couldn't make any headway there. The reasoning I got was, well, if we do that for this, then others are going to expect us to do that for this. So we just won't do anything, and now we can't be pushed from both sides. So it finally jagged out, and I had just about decided we're not going to make this, but we have a memorial on our Capitol grounds in West Virginia, and many states do. And that memorial on our Capitol grounds has 11,424 names on it of individuals who were killed, who died as a result of combat. It was built during the Vietnam War when loved ones were being shipped back home for burial, and that's why the legislation said killed in combat, because that's what they were experiencing. So those that died in some other way were not included on that wall. That has been changed, so now it includes all of those that, whatever means death occurred on active duty in the armed forces in West Virginia, that it's on there. But because of all those things, I decided we needed to do something in West Virginia to honor the families of those lost. I wasn't thinking of Ohio or Connecticut or California or anything else. I'm thinking of our own people, West Virginians. So I was on a committee when we were building a state veteran cemetery, and our job basically was, as a committee, to decide where we're going to put the administrative building and the maintenance building and the flag poles and all that sort of thing, to tell the contractor, where do you want this stuff, So when I came up with this idea, I went to that committee, or during a meeting of that committee, I said, we need to do something to honor those names on that wall. They said, well, that's a great idea. We should have done that a long time ago. Since your idea, why don't you design something and see if we can't get that done? Okay, well, we did. And it was accepted. The design we finally came up with was accepted, and we did the very first one on October the 2nd, 2013, in West Virginia. It had never been done anywhere in the United States before. We thought we were done. That's it. We've done what we're supposed to do for our own people. But it got on the internet. Other people began seeing what we did. The first one that came to our attention was the son of a father that had sacrificed his life in Vietnam. He is at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. He says, we got to do this. We got to do this for Valley Forge and for my father and all the others that have been lost, So he took the ball and ran with it, and that was the number 2. Well, okay, that's great. But then it continued to grow. So today, there are 47 completed and standing somewhere in the United States as far away as Hawaii, and California to New York to Florida to Georgia to Texas to you name it. We got about 4 states yet that have not done anything, but we haven't given up. We'll get them. It's just a matter of time. But as those that we have dedicated, those 47, so very, very often at these dedications, and one of the commitments I made when we started this program, organized a nonprofit group to do this, I will attend every groundbreaking, and I will attend every dedication. I've missed a couple. One time conflict, and the other time I was sick, so I didn't make it. But other than that, I've been able to do it. We've got 32 that we're going to do sometime this year, at least 32, because they're already on the books, ready to go, at various dates throughout the year. But it is the first time in the history of America that the Gold Star families have something in common with every other one. And even though it might be just a community, and the other communities in the state may not even know about it yet, but the Gold Star families in that community have come together. Now they know each other. They're having support of each other that they have never had before in all these years. So it means to them, and I've heard this over and over, that this monument indicates that my loved one will never be forgotten, because this represents them. It is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. I'll never have another chance to reap the rewards that I have gained just to be a part of it. And the communities do all the work. I just get to enjoy everything that they do, you know. And it is opening up an avenue for the Gold Star families that they've never had before, which to me is extremely important.
You got to be very proud of where it's at now.
I am, and I'm so proud of the communities, the people in the communities who have taken this on, formed a committee, and accomplished this on their own. We furnish them all the keys and things to do, but they've got to do it themselves. It's their representation, not ours. Yeah. Thank you.